The morning my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and told me I was too much to handle, I didn't say a word. I just nodded, walked to my car, and sat there for a long time staring at the steering wheel. I was 67 years old. I had buried a wife, raised a son, and built a business from nothing. And now I was sitting alone in a driveway that I had paid for, outside a house that I had financed, being told that I was too much. My name is Walter Hensley, and this is the story of how I almost lost everything, not to a stranger, not to bad luck, but to my own son and the woman he married. I need to start a few years back, because none of this makes sense without context. My wife, Patricia, passed away in the spring of 2019 after a long fight with ovarian cancer. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, who kept a notebook with the names of our neighbors' grandchildren, who made our son Marcus feel like the most important person in any room he walked into. When she died, something went quiet in our house that has never come back. Marcus was 34 at the time. He had married his wife, Brianna, 2 years earlier in a ceremony that Patricia planned almost entirely by herself, despite being deep in chemotherapy. My wife wanted one thing: to see her son get married. She got that. 4 months later, she was gone. I grieved the way men of my generation grieve, quietly. I worked in my woodshop. I watched the news too late at night. I called Marcus every Sunday and listened to him tell me about his week. I told myself that this was enough, that I was fine. Looking back now, I understand that Brianna saw my grief as an opening. It started small, the way these things always do. Marcus and Brianna were renting an apartment in Charlotte when Patricia died. I had the house in Mooresville, 4 bedrooms, 2 acres, a shop out back, more house than one man needs. Marcus mentioned they were thinking about buying a place, and I offered to help. I want to be clear about what help meant to me. I had spent 40 years running a flooring installation company. I was not a wealthy man by any dramatic measure, but I had been careful. Patricia and I had paid off the Mooresville house. I had a 401k, a small brokerage account, and a piece of commercial property in Statesville that I rented to a plumbing supply company for $3,100 a month. I had enough. More than enough. So when Marcus said they were looking at a house in Huntersville, a newer development, 4 bedrooms, nice school district, I told him I would cover the down payment, $240,000. A gift, I said. For you and Brianna. For your future. Marcus hugged me. Brianna cried. She said I was the most generous father she had ever seen. She called her own parents to tell them. I felt, for the first time since Patricia's funeral, like I had done something right. That was March of 2021. By November of 2022, they had a daughter, my granddaughter, Lily. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, born on a Tuesday. I drove to the hospital and held her in the delivery room and thought about Patricia and about how unfair it was that she wasn't there and about how this tiny girl was the best thing to happen to our family in years. I cried in the hallway where no one could see me. Then I went back in and held Lily again. I started driving to Huntersville every Wednesday. It was a 40-minute trip each way, and I didn't mind it. I would bring groceries or a meal I had cooked, or just myself. I watched Lily while Brianna ran errands. I helped Marcus build a deck in the backyard on weekends. I was present. I thought that's what a good father and grandfather did. I did not notice at first that Brianna had begun to manage my presence. It was subtle. A text from Marcus saying Wednesday wasn't great this week. Could I come Thursday instead? Then Thursday wasn't good either. How about the following Monday? Visits that used to last 3 or 4 hours started ending at 2. Brianna would come downstairs with Lily already asleep in her arms and say she needed to get her down for a real nap. I would drive home with half a lasagna in my passenger seat. I chalked it up to new parent exhaustion, to the natural rhythm of young families. I told myself I was probably being too present, that I needed to give them space. The mistake I made was listening to that voice. In the spring of 2023, I had a minor heart procedure. A stent. Routine, my cardiologist said. Though I'm not sure there's anything routine about someone feeding a wire into your heart. I was in the hospital 2 nights. Marcus visited once, for about 90 minutes, and spent part of that time on his phone. Brianna did not come at all. She sent flowers. When I came home to the Mooresville house alone, I realized that I had a problem. Not a medical problem, a structural one. I was 66 years old, living by myself, with no one who would notice quickly if something went wrong. The Statesville property produced income, but if something happened to me, who managed it? The brokerage account, the house, all of it sat in my name alone. And my will was 12 years old and named Patricia as the primary beneficiary. I called an estate planning attorney named Sandra Okafor in Mooresville. She had been recommended to me by a man at my church who had recently gone through a complicated estate matter with his siblings. I sat in her office for 2 hours, and at the end of it I had a clear picture of what I needed to do. Update the will. Create a revocable trust. Designate clear beneficiaries. Establish a durable power of attorney for medical decisions with someone I trusted completely. I trusted Marcus completely. I called him the next day and asked if we could meet for lunch. He came, and I walked him through what I had talked about with Sandra. I told him I wanted to designate him as my POA for medical decisions. I told him the updated will would leave the Mooresville house and the Statesville property to him, with a portion of the brokerage account set aside for Lily's education. I told him I wanted to be thoughtful about this, while I was still sharp enough to be thoughtful. Marcus seemed genuinely moved. He reached across the table and put his hand on mine and said, "Dad, you're not going anywhere." I said, "I know. But let's be smart anyway." We were both in good spirits when we left the restaurant. I remember thinking on the drive home that Patricia would have been pleased. She always said I was too private about money, that I waited too long to have hard conversations. She was right. She was usually right. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that when Marcus went home that afternoon and told Brianna about our conversation, she did not share his response. I found this out later, in fragments. The way you piece together what actually happened in the hours you weren't in the room. That same evening, Brianna began looking into the Statesville property. I only know this because 6 months later, when things had already begun to fall apart, Marcus let something slip during an argument. He said Brianna had done her research. I asked him what that meant. He looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. It wasn't until I had my attorney pull the property records that I saw she had requested access to the deed history and the lease documentation through a records request I had not authorized. She was learning what I owned. The change in Marcus was gradual and then sudden, the way Hemingway said about bankruptcy. He stopped returning my calls the same day. He started responding to texts hours later with short answers. The Wednesday visits became once a month, then less. When I pushed, he said Brianna was stressed with Lily and with her job, and that he needed to prioritize his household. I understood that. I did not push harder. I still believed I was the problem. I still believed I needed to give more space. Then came Father's Day of 2023. I had assumed, as I had every year, that we would have dinner together. Not an elaborate thing. I had even offered to bring the food, to cook, to make it easy on Brianna. Marcus texted me 2 days before. "Hey Dad, Brianna's parents are in town for the weekend. Going to be a full house. Maybe we can do something the week after?" I stared at that text for a long time. I wrote back, "Of course. Enjoy the weekend." I spent Father's Day alone in my woodshop building a toy chest for Lily that she would not receive for another 4 months. The week after never happened. Something came up. Then something else. By August, I had not seen my granddaughter in 11 weeks. I want to pause here because I know what some people will say. That I should have confronted Marcus directly. That I should have demanded answers. That I was too passive. Maybe. But I want to be honest about what it feels like to be in that position, to be a man in his late 60s who has already lost his wife, who is watching his relationship with his only son quietly evaporate, who genuinely cannot tell whether the problem is his daughter-in-law's hostility or his own neediness. You second-guess everything. You don't want to make it worse. You tell yourself that patience is love. In September, I drove to Huntersville unannounced. I know. In hindsight, I understand why that was a mistake tactically. But I had not seen Lily since Memorial Day, and I had a birthday present in the back seat, a wooden pull toy I had made by hand in the shop, and I could not wait anymore. Brianna answered the door. She did not invite me in. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and told me she wished I had called first. I said I had been calling. She said Marcus was busy and that this wasn't a good time. I asked if I could just give Lily the present. Brianna said Lily was sleeping. I looked past her into the house. Lily was not sleeping. Lily was in the living room behind her, sitting in a little pink chair watching something on a tablet. Brianna followed my gaze. There was a pause. Then she stepped slightly to the side to block my view. "Walter," she said, "I think you need to respect our boundaries." I drove home. I did not say another word. But something shifted in me on that drive, something that had been slowly bending finally snapped clean. Not into rage, into clarity. I called Sandra Okafor the next morning. Marcus called me that evening before I had a chance to speak with Sandra. He had clearly just spoken with Brianna. His voice had that careful, practiced quality it gets when he is repeating something that has been workshopped. He said he wanted to talk about the boundaries conversation. He said Brianna felt I was putting too much pressure on their family. He said they needed me to dial back the visits and the unannounced drop-bys. He said he hoped I understood. I said I understood. Then I asked him one question. I asked whether Lily would be at Thanksgiving. There was a pause. He said they were actually thinking of doing Thanksgiving with Brianna's family this year, since they had traveled for Father's Day. He said maybe we could do something the week before, just a small dinner. I said that sounded fine. Then I hung up and sat in the quiet of my kitchen and realized that I had been slowly and efficiently cut out of my son's life, and that the woman doing the cutting had done it so carefully that Marcus either did not see it or had decided not to. I met with Sandra the following week. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked me a question that I have thought about many times since. She said, "Walter, when you made that gift in 2021, the down payment, did you document it in any way?" I told her I had written Marcus a check. There was a paper trail. She asked if there was any written agreement about what the gift was or was not, whether there were any conditions attached. I said no. It was a gift. Clean and simple. She nodded slowly. She said, "I want you to understand something. As it stands, you have given your son and daughter-in-law $240,000 with no documentation of intent. If your relationship deteriorates further, and if there is ever a legal dispute about your estate or your assets, that gift could be characterized in ways you might not like. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying you need to protect yourself now while you have full capacity to do so." I asked her what protecting myself looked like. She spent the next 40 minutes explaining. I left her office with a legal pad full of notes and a feeling I had not expected. Relief. Not because the situation was resolved. It wasn't. But because I finally understood that I had the ability to act, that I was not simply at the mercy of my son's marriage. Over the following 3 weeks, Sandra and I restructured everything. The Mooresville house went into a revocable trust. The trust named a professional fiduciary as successor trustee, a woman named Carol Whitfield who came recommended by Sandra and who had no family connection to anything or anyone involved. The trust specified clearly what would happen to every asset I owned. I updated the will. Lily's education fund remained. The Statesville property, which generated the majority of my passive income, was restructured. A new lease was drafted with the plumbing supply company, one that had a clause allowing me to transfer management to Carol at any point without requiring Marcus's involvement. And the durable power of attorney, the document I had told Marcus at lunch would be his. I assigned instead to my old business partner, a man named Ray Decker, who had known me for 30 years and who, unlike my son, had driven to the hospital without being asked when I had my stent procedure. I did not tell Marcus any of this. In October, Marcus texted me about Thanksgiving again. The small dinner he had mentioned, the week before the actual holiday. I agreed. I drove to Huntersville on a Tuesday evening with a sweet potato casserole Patricia used to make. Brianna was polite in the clipped way she had developed pleasant surface. Nothing underneath. Lily ran to me when I came in the door, and I picked her up and held her and thought, this is still worth it. Whatever it costs, this is still worth it. After dinner, while Marcus was putting Lily to bed, Brianna sat across from me at the kitchen table. She poured herself a second glass of wine and looked at me with an expression I had not seen before, direct, almost businesslike. She said she wanted to talk about the Statesville property. I kept my face neutral. I asked what about it. She said that she and Marcus had been talking and that they felt it might make more sense for Marcus to take over the management now, while I was still able to walk him through it. She framed it as being about practical continuity. She used the word transition 3 times. She said it would simplify things and that Marcus had already spoken with a property management company. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said that was an interesting idea and that I would give it some thought. She smiled and said she thought it made a lot of sense. I nodded and took a sip of coffee and said nothing else. She moved on to other topics, but I sat there thinking about Sandra's question, did you document it in any way, and I understood now exactly what had been happening. The reduced visits, the managed distance, the isolation from Lily. It had never been about boundaries. It had been about positioning. Make the old man feel guilty. Make him feel like he's the problem. Make him eager to prove his love. Then approach him about the income property while he's sitting at a dinner table feeling grateful just to be included. It was the most calculated thing I had ever witnessed. And she had nearly pulled it off. 2 weeks after that dinner, Marcus sent me a follow-up text about the Statesville property. He said Brianna had mentioned they talked, and he thought it was worth exploring. He asked if he could have Ray Decker's contact information, since he thought Ray would know the operational side. I read that text standing in my woodshop. Ray's information. To manage a property that Ray had no involvement with whatsoever. What Marcus didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had already assigned Ray as my POA, and that Ray's name appeared in my restructured documents in a very specific legal capacity. They were asking me to hand them the contact information for the man who now legally stood between them and everything I owned. I did not respond to that text for 3 days. When I did, I kept it simple. I said I had already made some changes to how the Statesville property was managed, and that I was happy to talk through the details when the time was right. Marcus called me within the hour. His voice had lost the careful quality. He sounded caught off guard. He asked what kind of changes. I told him I had done a general estate planning review and restructured a few things for simplicity. I told him Carol Whitfield was now the successor trustee and that Ray was my POA. I told him these decisions were not personal, they were practical. There was a long silence. Then Marcus said, "Dad, why would you give Ray power of attorney? He's not family." I said, "Ray drove to the hospital without being asked." That's what I needed. Another silence. Marcus said he thought we should all sit down and talk, him, me, and Brianna. I said I was open to that. We met at my house in Mooresville on a Saturday morning in November. Brianna came in with the energy of someone who had prepared talking points. She said she was concerned about my decision-making. She said the word isolation, that she worried I was isolating myself, cutting out family. She said she wanted to make sure I was okay. She said she cared about me. I let her finish. Then I took a folder off the kitchen counter and set it on the table. Inside was a printed summary of every visit I had made to their house over the previous 2 years, with dates, durations, and a brief note of any interaction with Lily. I had started keeping this log in September on Sandra's advice. I also had printed copies of every text message between Marcus and me from the previous 18 months, including the Father's Day text, the Thanksgiving texts, and the message asking for Ray's contact information. I am not a dramatic man by nature. Patricia would tell you that. I do not enjoy confrontation. But I had spent 40 years in a business where documentation was the difference between getting paid and getting taken advantage of, and I knew how to lay out a clear record. I said, "I'm not isolated. I know exactly what's been happening, and I've spoken with my attorney." The room got very quiet. Brianna looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the folder. I said I was not interested in a legal dispute with my son. I was not angry, or rather, I was. But the anger had been sitting long enough to cool into something more useful. I said I had restructured my affairs to protect myself, and that those structures were in place and would remain in place. I said I wanted a real relationship with Marcus and with Lily, and that I was willing to work toward that. But I was not willing to trade my financial security for access to my granddaughter. Those two things were never supposed to be connected. Marcus said almost nothing. He looked at the table. At some point he put his hand over his face. Brianna said they should leave, and that she didn't appreciate being ambushed. I said she was welcome to go. I asked Marcus to stay. He stayed. Brianna left. I heard her car pull out of the driveway. Marcus and I sat at that kitchen table for 2.5 hours. It was the hardest conversation I have ever had with another person. He cried twice. I cried once near the end, when he told me that Brianna had told him, early in 2023, that she thought my closeness with Lily was unhealthy. That word. About a grandfather and his granddaughter. I cried once and quietly, and then I kept talking. I learned things at that table that I had not known. I also said things that I suspect Marcus had needed to hear for a long time. I told him that his mother would have been devastated. I told him I didn't say that to wound him. I said it because it was true, and because Patricia's absence had made it too easy for both of us to pretend that the relationship between a man and his only son does not require maintenance. I did not get everything I wanted from that conversation. Marcus did not come home with a new marriage or a new wife. He went back to Huntersville that evening to the same house and the same dynamic. But something had shifted. Something small and important. He looked at me differently when he left. Less managed. More like himself. In the months that followed, things changed incrementally. Visits became more regular once every 2 weeks. Then weekly. Then sometimes twice. Brianna's participation was limited and remained formal. But she stopped managing my access to Lily. I think she understood now that the leverage she had imagined she possessed was no longer there. Lily turned 2 in February. I built her a small rocking horse from cherry wood that had been sitting in my shop for years. I brought it over on her birthday and sat on the floor while she climbed on and off it 17 times in a row, which is apparently the ideal number. Marcus sat next to me on the floor. We drank coffee and watched her, and didn't say much. It was one of the better afternoons I can remember. I still see Sandra every 6 months. Carol Whitfield is still my successor trustee. Ray is still my POA. Those structures are not going anywhere. Not because I am at war with my family, but because I learned that love and legal protection are not opposites. Patricia would have said that. She would have said, "Take care of yourself, Walter, because no one else is going to do it for you. And the people you love most are sometimes the ones least equipped to." I said at the beginning that I sat in a driveway outside a house I had paid for, being told I was too much. I want to say something about that moment, now that I'm on the other side of it. I don't think Brianna is a villain in the way stories usually require. I think she is a woman who decided early on that I was a threat to something she was trying to build, and she acted on that decision with a thoroughness I still find remarkable. I was not prepared for it. Most people aren't, because most people don't expect to need to be. What I know now is this. At 67, a man still has choices. A man can sit in a driveway and feel diminished, or he can drive home, call his attorney, and start making things right. He can give his love without surrendering his leverage. He can forgive without forgetting how it happened. My son is still my son. My granddaughter still climbs on that rocking horse every time I come over. The Statesville property still generates $3,100 a month, and every dollar of it is under exactly the protections it should have had from the beginning. Patricia would say I got there eventually. She would also say, I should have gotten there sooner. She was usually right.